Imagine a world where people are mostly concerned with each other's well-being, about working together to protect the environment and human rights, while enabling good food and water for ourselves and all other living beings. In other words, about developing love. Our land and soil is a shared responsibility for all of us, and farming is central to so much of this. All farming needs to be viable in the longer term and also use proven methods that can make farmland ever more productive and fertile, whilst also at the same time remaining healthy and in balance, but without relying on external inputs such as fertilizers or animal feeds, apart of course from the sun and rain. When Peter Brown came to Tablehurst Farm 2 decades ago, it was to develop these concepts and involve the wider community in farming here. And this led to the start of a community-supported farm, where, as a cooperative, well over 600 people share in the responsibility. The farm is perfectly viable in the normal sense, but it makes enough money to pay for the 20 people who work here and invest a little bit back each year into the land and buildings, while also experimenting to find out what the farm can really offer.
Come on in, have some breakfast. The silver rain, the golden sun, the fields where scarlet poppies run, and all the ripples in the wheat are in the bread that we do eat. And when we sit at every meal and say a grace, we always feel that we are eating rain and sun and fields where scarlet poppies run.
When you see a farm as a complete living organism that maintains its own health and fertility without bringing in fertilizers, pesticides, or even water from outside, you recognize farming more as an art than an industry.
Here we have a dam which we built a few years after I came, so it's been here about 18 years. Provide water for our stock and for our polytunnels and for irrigating our vegetable crops. And now we have this wonderful nature with a whole lot of wildlife. When you get those periods of very heavy rainfall which cause flooding, you have a kind of buffer because this can fill up and it can help prevent flooding. It's not feasible to use lots of mains water, partly because of the expense, but also because of its quality, to irrigate crops.
And that art starts with the soil. It starts with the cycle of life and death in the soil. Such an amazing cycle. The sun feeding plants that feed the microflora in the soil, and these then die off and become food for life again. You learn that maintaining that incredible fertility and biodiversity in the soil also calls for a biodiversity above the ground. As a farmer, you work with the seasons, bringing in different crops with different root depths to help create that health in the soil. This variety in crops also creates more nourishing and interesting food to sell in our shop and for people to eat. The biodiversity, the bees and other insects, as well as the birds, all benefit. Slowly you see that everything is interdependent, and that this diversity brings a balance and resilience. It enriches life, and it also encompasses the bigger picture of a world that also needs to be brought into balance, where communities around the world can create fulfilling agricultural lives by working together and working with nature.
We have raw manure as it's come out of the barns. So it's cow manure and straw. You can see it's actually pretty smelly. This is uncomposted. And if we were to spread this straight on the fields, a good part of it would just leach into the groundwater with the risk of it being lost. That's what's so important. On a biodynamic farm, you actually compost the material so that it's in this stable form, which is basically humus. And the nutrients don't leach out into the ground, because if you see a cowpat on a field, you'll see this dark, luxurious growth all around the cowpat, which indicates that the nutrients have dissolved into the soil water, and that actually all farmers, organic, non-organic, should be composting their manure.
And the genesis of me starting here was because I saw a farmer, a conventional farmer, a fourth generation farmer in Australia, stirring something in a barrel one day, because he just seemed like a normal guy with a big dairy farm. And he said, well, my land was getting sick, and I thought I was going to have to sell the farm. And then he said, I went to a conference where they talked about biodynamics, and I thought, I'll give it a try, I'm desperate. And he changed his farm. It was like a 500 hectare farm, and he never looked back. And all his land looked green. You could see it in drought periods, Australia, big droughts, and all his pastures looked green and the neighbours all looked brown like dust. And that made me think, wow.
These are dandelions drying. It will be another one of the compost preparations. Very, very good mycorrhizal affinity. And the mycorrhiza are fungi in the soil which actually have a symbiotic relationship with the plant, and in exchange for sugars from the plant, the mycorrhiza actually give the plant micronutrients.
They also make a special preparation using cow manure, which is applied to the land in tiny doses, and this helps build up the soil fertility. There is the question about animals. Can you have a truly sustainable farm without them? Most biodynamic farms have cattle. Why? Because one of the best ways to bring fertility into a rotation is to have a mixed pasture with herbs, clover and grass as part of it. You can then mow it or mulch it, but grazing animals here adds so much more. Not only do they make it viable and cost-effective by providing milk and wool and their meat from this pasture, but they also add their manure. Cows bring a special health to a farm through their manure. A cow eats a tremendous amount, and their digestive system works with the microorganisms in an amazing way. Just as with the microorganisms in the soil, a cow has the right microflora and bacteria in their stomach to break down all the roughage, and they in turn can digest and absorb these bacteria.
That means they want us to move them, but they've actually got plenty of grass here. And if you look at this lady here, she's busy chewing her cud. And of course, chewing the cuds is to do with the fact that they're herbivores and they have the four stomachs, and that they're regurgitating the grass and re-chewing it. And that is all about to do with enabling the bacteria in their rumen to digest the cellulose. And so a cow's stomach is a little bit like the soil. You have a whole microflora in there, a certain balance, which works on the food that they eat, and therefore it depends what you're feeding them, and that's why you would never change a cow's diet too suddenly, because the microflora have to adjust. And the cow's stomach is specifically designed to work with forage, not with grains. And so if a cow is fed too much grain, it can really upset the balance in the stomach, and you get something called acidosis. And a cow who will gorge herself on grain or on cow cake can literally die because it upsets the stomach to that degree. Well, a lot of our cattle we don't just keep for 8 or 9 years, but they can go easily to 15, and we've even had a couple going up to 20 years old. And as long as they're productive and they produce a calf a year, we're of course very, very happy to do that. Aren't we, Gil? Eh? The cows have their horns, and they're a bit playful, as this lady is, and so you have to respect them, but they're not aggressive. The only time the cows are really aggressive is if they're protecting their calf. And we have very little problems by keeping the horns on the cows. Especially when they're in their field. Of course they've got lots of space, and in the winter when they come in the barns we just give them a little bit more space than they would normally be kept in a conventional farm where they're cramped quite close together, but they very rarely damage each other. And so we're not using any of those wormers or porons for the cattle specifically. We have away in the very past when I first came, but for many, many years we've never needed to worm the cattle. Animals have this very strong instinct, particularly if they're kept on pastures where they can use the senses and the sense of smell and so on, that they know exactly what is good for them and what isn't. And even a chicken, well, if you put all the ingredients out, they will take exactly what they need to balance their diet out of this amazing instinct. And therefore it's important to give the cows the possibilities to browse on hedges and so on.
An animal's senses are fundamental to their health. Walking around a field, they can choose the right herbs to eat to keep them healthy and in balance. They can have the sun and rain on their backs, or find shade, and be part of a social group that they know. If an animal is kept in a barn or indoors for too long, they lose all this ability to choose the right plants, and in turn to stay healthy. With biodynamic agriculture, the aim is to keep breeding cows from the same herd generation after generation, so that they become better adapted to the land they're on, its vegetation, and their manure becomes even better and better for the land and what it needs. Over time, the microflora and the manure and the soil start working together even better. Different livestock on the farm are just like different tools for an artist, and as a conscious person, the farmer is actually creating a vision of what the farm can become. Cows help create lush pastures, sheep help graze the slopes, and pigs particularly love woodlands and orchards. Animals help create these different landscapes.
So she'll eat that all down, and then this will get worked into the soil. So she'll do some of the work for us for cultivating it.
Starting pretty soon after they're born, almost every day I try to put in a shovelful of soil, and that's especially for the piglets because they nibble the soil straight away. They always do that, and it's very good for them because there's a lot of iron in there, and iron is what they need. Otherwise they go anemic.
Yeah, it is. For the next.
She's very protective.
do our animal feeds, and right now Emil's got a mix going for the pigs. That's just made up from grains on the farm, from barley and oats and wheat, usually some beans, or I don't know if you're using peas or beans. And then we also have dried kelp, dried seaweed. And that very simple mix is what we feed to our pigs. But this is what we do all through the year, and what feeds our pigs.
That's what's nice working in this garden is the variety. You know, if we had to just grow 1 or 2 crops, it would be so boring. But on any given day, you could be dealing with 10, 15 different plants.
Here you have the beetroot, you have the chard, you have the tomatoes.
Oh, it's all mixed up.
You know, and there's more beetroot at a different age, different stage.
Yeah.
And that's really nice. And you see how these leaves here are standing up so beautifully. That's usually a sign that they've had the spray of silica preparation. And it's absolutely delicious. Well, no, there's no chemicals being used at all. This is completely biodynamic. And that's the beauty of it. And particularly with the horticulture, the vegetables, you know, these are producing just as prolifically as conventionally.
100% natural. We just butcher it from the animal straight onto the counter. We don't put any preservatives or anything in our meat, and it just makes it taste so much better. Well, I feel much better about knowing that I'm not putting harmful stuff into other people's bodies with the work I'm doing.
And bees, what is their role? Bees are not like other domesticated animals. They could survive without humans, but for thousands of years humans have had a relationship with bees which is immensely important to farming. This again is because bees have evolved alongside plants and with the soils, and the bees play an important part in pollinating plants, and the honey they make to get themselves through the winter is very special. Each jar of honey comes from tens of thousands of plants that the bees have chosen to visit. You could try to chemically reduce honey to a sugar, but with a bit of thinking about all the flowers visited, you can see that it has different qualities and is perhaps best seen as a medicine, not a food. Ideally, a farmer should be as conscious of their bees as of their livestock or crops, as they are so important. And we need to create a landscape that bees need by giving them trees, shrubs, crops and flowers that supply them with the food they require throughout the year. And this is relatively simple at Tablehurst because there is great diversity here. The bees help us look at things slightly differently. People are now recognizing how bees are really struggling in the world. Bees help us realize we cannot have a healthy landscape without healthy bees. An unhealthy landscape is one of monocultures, with herbicides used extensively, and this is causing the suffering and problems. It is fascinating to hear a group of beekeepers telling stories about their bees, and these stories often make it very clear that a colony of bees is a being with its own consciousness, that beekeepers can relate to and actually communicate with. You sometimes hear that a colony dies when its beekeeper dies. And you see that all life has a certain consciousness, that there is a wisdom in the bees and in all other forms of life on the farm that we need to listen to. And this helps build up a picture of the wholeness of the farm, with humans central to the picture. This is the holistic vision that Tablehurst so beautifully and productively demonstrates.